This is William and Lonsdale, a podcast about the legal ecosystem and the fascinating people who make it tick. Today, your host Michael Green speaks with entertainment lawyer Bryce Menzies. You name an Australian film and Bryce has most likely worked on it. Muriel's Wedding, Romper Stomper, Proof, Ned Kelly, The Great Gatsby, The Babadook and The Dry, to name a very small portion. The law underpins everything Bryce does when working on a film, but he has also described his approach to some jobs as cowboy filmmaking, and this was certainly the case with the much-loved Australian film Kenny.
I mean, I think I got the work because when they came to see me, they said, do we need to clear all the people that we filmed at the Melbourne Cup? You know, look at this, and showed me some footage, and this woman that's very not in control of her legs was falling all over the place and stuff and clearly had too much to drink. So, you know, they said, can we use that? And I said, well, yes, you can. I mean, there's no privacy law in Australia. There's nothing that says you can't do it, as long as you're not defaming them. So it's truth. If you're not, you can do it. Now, I think the previous lawyer they'd seen said, no, a bit of clearance. So I got the gig.
This morning our guest lies in the law is Bryce Menzies. Bryce practices exclusively in entertainment law and I think almost exclusively in the film industry, maybe some TV as well. You name an Australian film over the last probably 40-odd years and there's a fair chance Bryce has been involved in the legal side of it. Far too numerous for us to mention, but they include Malcolm, The Big Steal, Muriel's Wedding, Death in Brunswick, Romper Stomper, Oscar and Lucinda, Kenny, The Great Gatsby, 10 Canoes, they go on and on. We are really pleased and happy to have you here this morning, Bryce. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Bryce, let's go back to your time at Monash Law School. In the 70s, Monash is a hotbed of activity or political activity then, and you were right in the middle of it.
Well, I'm not sure right in the middle, but yeah, no, it was fun. I mean, you know, we rode bikes to uni and it was all about changing the world and that's what we tried to do. I mean, not very successfully, I've got to say, but nevertheless.
So in trying to change the world, one of the things that caught my eye was milk raids on the mansions of the Toorak wealthy.
Well, occupation. I was just a kid, and in my first year when we occupied admin, which backfired terribly in terms of study because they introduced everything we wanted, which was continuous assessment, which meant that nobody had time to demonstrate. But yeah, the senior lefties went and raided Toorak for milk, and I love milk, so it was great for us.
What did you do with the milk that you purloined?
Milkshakes.
Milkshakes.
Made lots of milkshakes.
And it also mentions 100,000 people at a demonstration. That's a lot of people.
Yeah, we organised the organisation that I helped create, or I was chair for a while, was we took upon ourselves to organise a uranium demo. And that year was 100,000 people. It was, you know, they were all descending on Dallas Brooks Hall and we're having meetings with the coppers saying, they're not going to fit. Yeah, we know that, you know, so work out what to do with them and all that sort of stuff. So it was good experience to work out how to organise people.
And you couldn't afford shoes.
I was a hippie.
Well, when you say you're a hippie, I mean, you can be a hippie for a period, I guess, but I thought you went for 3 years without wearing shoes.
Maybe, I don't know, can't remember. There was a lot of us that didn't wear shoes. So.
Must have been cold.
It was where you could wear socks.
I see. I was assuming bare feet. And what about the High Court fan club? What was that?
In the last couple of years of uni, they built a new High Court, and we decided that we thought that was a good opportunity to get some publicity for legal aid, because legal aid was underfunded and the High Court was spending lots of money on the building, and so we thought, don't we come across a book called Solzhenitsyn's Rules for Radicals? So the idea is always to do something fun and interesting, and you can get. So we formed the High Court of Australia fan club, had a logo, we did T-shirts, and it was meant to be funny, and we drove to Canberra and demonstrated. Difficult, of course, the journos went on strike, and so, you know, we were in solidarity with them, so we wouldn't talk to any of the scabs, so we got very, very little publicity. But it was fun, although interesting, they thought we were after the Queen, of course, so they had sharpshooters on every building. So,
because the Queen was in Australia?
Yeah.
Or for the opening of the High Court?
For the opening of the High Court. But, yeah, no, John and I were sort of leaders. But, you know, I remember John at the High Court, and the police had grabbed some kid, and he went over and tried to protect them and give some legal advice, and I spoke to him later. What happened? The police just told me to shut up, so I did.
Now, you mentioned John. Who was John?
John Fain's a radio personality. You've come across it. So we went to uni together. And, yeah, his mum helped me get a job and all that sort of stuff. So
you dabbled in the theatre then, so maybe your love of the entertainment world was already in place because you did some theatre work, I think, while you were at uni.
Yeah, the key to student politics is organising and getting publicity and doing all that sort of stuff. And when you're doing politics, it's very hard to get an article in a newspaper. Nobody wants you. But I started to do some theatre because it was just organising, and it was so much easier to get publicity. So I had a great time. It was I ran the Monash. They put on a pantomime every year, and we put on, can't remember the musical, but it was terrible. But, you know, I was the organiser of it, and we had kids and adults, and it was helpful. The kids went on strike on me, and I had to get them back, and it's all about organising. It's all about organising. And, look, I've later discovered that, to be honest, that's what solicitors do. You know, a conveyance is no more than organising a party. When you get to the party, hopefully the banker brought some money and somebody else has got the title, so you can play. And that's to a degree what I do as a film lawyer. At some point, the client will come to you and say, look, I've raised enough money for this film, so now we've got to document it and get the cash. So my job is to organise a party and get the money and the signatures and everybody at the right time. So it happens.
And so all of this extracurricular activity you engaged in while you're a student at Monash actually was, unbeknownst to you, preparing you for what you do now.
Very much so, very much so. I mean, I found the law really interesting, and studying it's great fun, but it wasn't, when I started doing legal aid and stuff like that at Springvale, I discovered that it wasn't a knowledge of the law that was helpful. It was, you know, understanding people and trying to organise bits and pieces. I mean, and it's difficult as a young lawyer. You know, somebody comes in and says, "Oh, my husband's just left me. What do I do?" And I haven't had a girlfriend for longer than 3 months. How am I going to advise this person? So yeah, but I discovered later on that law was a lot about organising, and, you know, that's what I did. I didn't do that much real law. You need a basis of it, but that's what we do. You
talk about it being about organising. With the amount of extracurricular activity you were doing, you must be a very organised person yourself to have found time to study.
Funny thing is, I don't actually remember studying, but I'm trying to think back, and I must have studied. I enjoyed studying. And look, I'm a Virgo, you know, love lists, love a list. To-do lists, you know, spend my life doing a to-do list and never getting to the end of it, and often not doing any real work, just doing the to-do list.
You feel like you've done something by doing the list.
Yeah.
Now, what about articles? You mentioned John Fain and John's mother.
In those days,
come about?
In those days, articles was hard to get. I mean, I applied for 80 jobs or something and got, you know, 5 interviews or something. It was tough. We didn't do what law students do now, which you go and do what they call clerkships and stuff like that. We didn't do all that stuff. I mean, I sort of finished uni and sort of got to a surprise. What do I do now? Because I was so busy with, you know, all the committees and the stuff I was on. It was a bit bizarre. I thought, I better get a job now. And I had tried to leave the law a couple of times, but the theatre world had just collapsed with the collapse of the Labor Party, and, you know, so there wasn't any money to do anything. So I thought, okay, let's go back to being a lawyer. And John's mother rang me and said, or rang John and said, there's an ad in the Jewish News for a lawyer. So I of course, didn't read the Jewish News, but so I applied and I got the job.
What were your articles like at Roth Warren? Were they a structured sort of thing? Were you given freedom? I mean, articles don't really exist anymore, do they, with clerkships, etc.?
No, look, I had great articles. Arnold was a fantastic teacher. The precedents of the firm were just fantastic. Arnold, on the other hand, wasn't that organised, so he'd often throw me a conveyancing file that he'd forgotten about, and it was settling in 3 days, and I had to find everything and do it. So, he had all the great letters on the file, but he actually failed to do anything, but great teacher. And look, the first day I started, there was 2 partners, Arnold and Michael, and I was working until 6 o'clock, and I think I went into them and said, "Can I go home now?" And they must have rubbed their hands together and said, "We got a sucker here." And I had a little cupboard and I had a great time.
I read somewhere that you said your father was a very hard-working person and you picked up the habit from him.
I suspect so, yeah.
And that's why they rubbed their hands together, because they could see you were a hard worker.
But, we had interesting clients. One of the clients we had was a client called Mr. K. He taught me an enormous amount. One day he owned a whole square. He started Caves Rent-A-Car, so he's big dude. He owned a city block and he built a sort of a stud with houses around it. He was selling them out in the bush, and then the petrol crisis hit and couldn't sell them. So I'm selling one of these stupid apartments or houses, and the purchaser said, "Oh, can I move in early and rent it before I settle?" And I said, "Okay." I looked up the precedent and wrote Mr. K the letter. It said, the choice is yours, there's some risks, blah, 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 blah. He rings me up and says, "Get down here straight." I think he was on the first floor and I was on the second floor. "Right, get down here straight away." And he said, "I don't pay to ask bloody questions, I pay you all that money, give me answers. This is a stupid letter, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to take all my work away." And he was the firm's work. And I'm, pissing myself. But he was right. You don't get paid and it taught me a really important lesson. You don't get paid as a lawyer to ask questions. Got to give them advice. That's what they're paying for. What would you do? Is it too risky or not? So with freedom comes, he didn't take all the work away from the firm, by the way. And I did a whole lot of leases for them for years after that. So it was interesting.
Now there's one person who crops up in the year of your articles, famously kicked 4 goals for Carlton in the 1970 Premiership Grand Final, named Teddy Hopkins.
Yeah, I'd met Ted at uni because they were radical printers in Paran, and I think we set up a sort of screen printing workshop or something like that to make posters for demos and stuff. Ted was on his publishing crusade and had done a magazine called Art and a Texter. And it was a send-up of Art and Text, which was a serious art magazine, which, 2 people and a dog read. But they sent him a letter saying he was breaching copyright or something. And so they wanted to go to the Supreme Court. So he came to me and I went to the boss and said, "Look, no idea what I'm doing. Can I do it for pro bono?" And they said, "Sure, go for it." So I was able to do that, and the client paid the barrister's fees, of course, but we went to the Supreme Court with a crazy art dispute. So
did we win or lose?
We settled. But fortunately, we settled.
As most things do, yeah.
Crazy. But I had to explain to the barrister what second-degree art was.
You can explain it to our listeners as well, please, Bryce.
Andy Warhol can at soup. Yeah, so he's not considered. That's not considered a breach of copyright because he's painted the Campbell's soup on a different piece of paper, and it's art. But it is a copy. It wouldn't be effective as an artwork unless it was a copy, but it's not a breach of copyright. So second-degree art is where you're doing it it's in your second degree. So Lichtenstein, Warhol, all those artists from that period were doing that stuff with the cartoons, and the barrister looked blankly at me.
Can I take out of what you're saying that the real way you maybe possibly learned, or one of the main ways you learned through your articles, was being given responsibility?
Yeah, but also I was, David and Nadia, who...
Now this is David and Nadia Tass, famous Australian film producers and directors. David produced and Nadia directed.
Yep.
Who did The Big Steal, one of my favourites, Malcolm.
Correct.
And others like...
Ricky and Pete, and there's a fair few others. So they came to see me because they were looking for a lawyer because the 10BA had just been introduced. So 10BA was a piece of legislation in the tax department where investors could get a tax break for investing in films. So it was big news. They came to see me. I was lucky enough I'd made Wrong World beforehand and been to a Berlin Film Festival to start marketing it. So I had some idea what the process of making a film was about, which is getting the script, then making the film, then selling the film, and blah, blah, blah. So I was able to give some practical experience because I certainly didn't have any legal experience. I think I went to see Bill Marshall, who I later became partners for, because I was so nervous I didn't know anything about the law. So fortunately, before the meeting, I read the legislation and realised it wasn't that hard. And after the meeting, Bill didn't know any more than I did, so I said, we can do it. So we raised money for Malcolm through the legislation and managed to make the film for $1 million. The film went on to be enormously successful. It was on for a year and we sold it everywhere in the world, and they gave me an executive producer credit, so every review in America had executive produced by Bryce Menzies on it. So it was the launch of a career. And I'd go to the functions and stuff, and so I got to meet people in the industry. I mean, as it turns out, that film itself gave me an entire career. David Nada went on to make 8, 10, 12, 15 pictures. The line producer was Timothy White. He's gone on to make 30 pictures. Linda House was the production manager. She went on to make 10 or so pictures. So Linda made Muriel's Wedding. Tim made Death in Brunswick, and a whole pile of it, still working now. And so from that one film, I just got a whole lot of clients. I didn't realise. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to market the film and
market the practice.
It was soft sell. I was just there. I was doing it. So.
But tell me this, therefore the first question is, why did Nadia Tass and David Parker come to Bryce Menzies?
Maybe they got lost. I don't know.
I mean, at that stage, you are an employee solicitor, I'm assuming, at Roth Warren.
Correct.
So it's not as if you're a big name in the legal world, and the entertainment legal world.
There weren't. The only real, there was one or two lawyers in the entertainment practice in those days, and they were older. I was the same age as David, so we turned out to be mates. So,
and what about just digressing for a moment? Back then, between Melbourne and Sydney, I guess there would have been 2 or 3, as you say, lawyers doing film work anyway.
Not many.
What about now?
Oh, it's significantly greater for all sorts of reasons. But the film industry is quite successful at the moment, particularly with offshore production. So there's lots of firms that are doing it now. The big firms don't get into it at all. It's difficult for them, and they occasionally do acting for banks and stuff like that. But yeah, there's a lot. I mean, most of them have worked for me, I've got to say, over the time. And the other lot I've worked for Lloyd or Nina in Sydney.
Well, then let's look at the growth of the Australian film industry, starting with something I think you mentioned before, Section 10BA. Can you explain to us what that was and how it's progressed, the basis of the film industry has progressed from Section 10BA to where we are today, or wherever we are today?
So tax plays a fairly important role in the film industry throughout the world, in that films are generally very risky to make. So the money is always tough. So one of the things the film industry has done all over the world is to create tax breaks or various bits and pieces so investors can get involved in the industry and make it a bit more palatable in terms of risk. So 10BA was exactly that. So in the early days, you could invest $100 in a film or $10,000 in a film and get a tax break. Now, if you're on the marginal rate, that meant that you were entitled to get 50% off from that. So it only costs, if you're putting $10,000 in, it only costs you $5,000. And you got a break on the income of, can't remember what the break on the income was, but you were able to get a break on the income. So any income coming back was also relatively tax-free. So it's still a tough sell in a sense. You're going to investors, invest with me and I'll only lose half your money. But if you could structure it with loans and guarantees and returns and stuff like that, I think 50% was the income. You could also make it like it was a bit like investing in a bank, because if you pre-sell the film, so you've got a budget of $1 million and you've sold it for $500,000.
You've pre-sold it to a
distributor,
festival
or a distributor or sales agent or somebody. You can structure it so that the investor's really got no risk at all. Puts in the $10,000, gets the tax credit, and then gets the income that you're offering them later on down the track, which is certain amounts tax-free. So that's how you did it. Now, that meant that there was an enormous number of films, and particularly when the lawyers got hold of it and started playing with it, making it more easier to raise money. If you can go to an investor and say, because most investors are income rich but asset poor, so that they don't have assets to pay the tax or to invest in the film. So if you can go to the investor with a scheme that says, you give me $10,000, but I'll actually lend you the $10,000 for you to give it to me, and you will pay no tax on that $10,000. It's a good scheme, which meant there was lots of films.
It means there's no risk to me, the investor, because
no risk.
If the film loses, well, it's...
Correct. Other people are bearing the cost. Yeah. But that didn't last long because, of course, with that scheme, there were films made everybody's making films. Everybody's doing it. So lots of people are doing film. And out of that period, some of Australia's most successful films came. So, Malcolm was made under 10BA, so was Big Steel, and so was Crocodile Dundee. I mean, Crocodile Dundee made more money than every other film in probably the world at the time. I mean, it was the most successful film ever. People argue 10BA was bad because it's supply-led, which is true. It's not demand-led. So more films are made than you necessarily need. But films are art. You can't have a model in the sense that I'll make 5 films, one will be good. You've sort of got to throw your dice. And that's what happened in 10BA. There were some terrible films made, absolutely terrible films. But there were some good ones. And that's what you have to do, in my view, to get the film industry going. So that worked. 10BA got gradually watered down to 120% and then 100%, blah, 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 and so it became less effective. But it was very helpful in those days to get to but again, it was demand-led rather than supply-led. So what happened was that the next phase of funding for films was the government decided to delete the tax altogether and just have a body that gave out money, which was Screen Australia, or in those days, Film Finance Corporation. And then subsequent to that, we've got that plus the producer offset and all that stuff. There's always a scheme to help films, in the same way that there's schemes to help the car industry and all that sort of stuff. Manufacturing or any of those other industries get just as much subsidy as films. It's not, you get a lift in the car, so films, funded, lefty pinkos. But all industries get that sort of funding, and that's how you keep them. When you don't, you lose them.
Now, Bryce, let's get back to your career. You've just been explaining to us the complexities of the investment side of the film world as an expert in that area. But early days, when you're at Rothwarren as an employee solicitor, you're in this highly contract-driven world of the film industry. How did you have the wherewithal, the knowledge to draft complex and complicated contracts?
Well, I'd ring a friend or, I remember ringing Lloyd and said, can I pinch one of your documents? He said, yeah, go for it, mate, go for it.
Sorry, who's Lloyd?
Lloyd Hart is one of the elder statesmen in this industry, so he's been around for a long time. He's acted for Screen Australia, New South Wales, all that sort of stuff. Look, you'd make it up. I mean, I had no precedence when I started. None whatsoever. So I had to make them up, and I'm still using some of the ones I made up then, partly because they've become industry standards, because I drafted them, and you see them come back and you think, that rings a bell. I think people are less likely to ring me and say, can they pinch them? But some people do.
And so you just used your own nous, really, and cut and pasted things from wherever you could see something was worthwhile.
And the mistake is never to go back and read them, because they're not nearly as good as your memory. Yeah, I mean, the film industry is incredibly contract-driven. I mean, I've never come across an industry where everything is so individual and, every contract's different. And a film now, you're making a $10 million film. I work on about 150 contracts, but the producers do another 100, which is all the crew and all that sort of stuff. Everything's contract-driven. So, yeah, it's very heavy contract, and none of it's standard. It's all ego and credits and stuff. So.
And you really had to work by the seat of your pants to start with. You were going by the seat of your pants, using your common sense, looking at a precedent where you could get hold of a precedent and cobbling things together.
Yeah, and we weren't nearly as professional as we are now. We just didn't do the clearances that they do now. It was much more cowboy filmmaking. I mean, I remember on Plains of Heaven, we had an American talk show that we used a clip of, and I found the people that owned the rights and said, can I have the rights? And they said, yeah, sure, yeah, but you can't have any rights to the people in the show. So it's far too difficult. So I thought, well, if it's too difficult to give me the rights, it must be too difficult to sue. It's not necessarily true. So we used it anyway, but...
So on occasions, and maybe more than occasionally, you had to make a judgment call. Are they likely to sue or not? Or do you reckon we can sort of sneak this one through?
Yeah, I mean, you do. You've got to make that. Otherwise, you'd never use anything. I mean, Kenny's a good example. Kenny was, they made, the filmmakers were going out every weekend and filming.
Now just remind us, what was the story of Kenny?
Kenny was a mockumentary about a toilet cleaner or operator, and he'd take toilets to various events, including the Melbourne Cup. I mean, I think I got the work because when they came to see me, they said, do we need to clear all the people that we filmed at the Melbourne Cup? Look at this, and show me some footage, and this woman that's very not in control of her legs, was falling all over the place and stuff, and clearly had too much to drink. So, they said, can we use that? And I said, well, yes, you can. I mean, there's no privacy law in Australia. There's nothing that says you can't do it, as long as you're not defaming them. So it's truth. If you're not, you can do it. Now, I think the previous lawyer they'd seen said, no, a bit of clearance. So I got the gig by saying you didn't have to do anything. I mean, but it is a matter of the law. I mean, the fact is, there is no privacy in Australia, and you can be filmed as long as you're not, it's not secret recordings and blah, blah, blah and all that sort of stuff.
And so, despite I use the phrase, you work by the seat of your pants, beneath that, you had to have a working knowledge of what the law actually was, that there was no privacy, there is no privacy law in Australia, and things of that nature.
It's a good idea to have it's a good idea. I mean, look, I really love the law. I don't read a lot of cases. I don't do any of the traditional stuff that barristers and stuff do, but I think the law's fascinating, and it's amazingly logical. And it's not, whoever said the law was an ass was, I don't know, it was an exaggeration. It's not. It can be, but it very rarely is. It's usually bloody sensible, and judges are usually very clever. It's and the law is there for a purpose.
As I've got older, I formed the view that on most occasions, what you think a sensible outcome would be mirrors the law.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, yeah.
William and Lonsdale is brought to you by Green's List, one of the leading multidisciplinary barristers lists in Australia. Green's List believe in promoting conversation around the ideas and issues that shape not only our legal system, but our wider community.
So let's get back to the fascinating world of entertainment. You did the legals for Muriel's wedding. Huge success.
Fantastic success, yeah. It was great. It was very difficult to raise the money for it because we made some mistakes in doing it, in that we had a company that offered to contribute $500,000 to the budget. Might have been $500,000 US, but anyway, it was $500,000 something to the budget. And we said, yeah, sure, that's great. And then we said, can you have a guarantee? We need a guarantee or something. And they said, yeah, sure, we'll give you a guarantee. And they did. And they gave me a bank guarantee. And I said, but then when it came to getting strike price, which is I'll get to that in a second, but the bank was a private bank. I couldn't get any information. I couldn't, you can't go to another bank and you need a letter of credit. And so all this, I learned all about what you need to trade and all this stuff because we didn't have it. When you're doing a film, it's important that you can finish the film with the money you've got. So a promise from somebody is not good enough. You've got to have the cash in the bank, and that's meeting strike price. So you've got to meet strike price before you can start. So that's why you have to have guarantee. Guarantee is not enough. You've got to have it turned into cash. So I had lots of meetings with French banks turning it into cash. We eventually got there. The company that gave me the guarantee was pretty good. They built the channel, so they were big as Channel 9. So, but it's just because of jurisdictions, you can't have just a bit of paper. You need a bit more than that. So anyhow, the film was exceptionally successful, but we knew that almost from the day it finished because we got into Cannes Film Festival and one of the funders decided to immediately buy out all the world except Australia. So all the funders got their money back before the film was released. So it was exceptionally successful. I'm still working on it today.
Really? How can that be?
Well, because we're selling it again and again and again. Most films get sold every 7 or 10, 15 years, so we're selling it again.
I mean, I've seen Muriel's wedding on TV recently, and that's the sort of thing you're working on.
In terms of TV, it might be the residuals because actors get a bit of that money, so you've got to negotiate with the union about some of that if you haven't done it up front. It would be normally sales to other territories. So in America, the distributor went broke and we've trying to work out who's got the rights and all that sort of stuff. So, and then you sell it again. Films get licensed for certain periods for certain territories. So once they're over, you sell them again. Having
a worldwide success, as Muriel's wedding was, what impact did that have upon you and your practice in your career, did it have a mushroom effect on you and the amount of work that was coming through your door?
Yes. Well, because, I mean, as a lawyer for the film, you always get your name in the credits, so nobody else watches them except other filmmakers. But it's an ad, there's your ad. So, you're in the thing, you get invited everywhere to get to talk and all that sort of stuff. So, it was very... And again, a lot of the people that worked on the film went on to make other films.
And therefore, you're the only lawyer they know, entertainment lawyer, and so...
You get the work.
The work grows.
Yeah.
What about a South African swimmer? Why would a South African swimmer be wanting to sue the producers of Muriel's wedding?
Because there's a storyline in Muriel's wedding. We remember the Muriel sees an ad for a swimmer who wants to get married and become an Australian citizen. That's the storyline. Now, I suspect that we probably copied the storyline, but there's no copyright in storylines or ideas. It's just an idea. We didn't breach any copyright. The lawyers that acted for this swimmer made a classic mistake. When they sent the letter of demand, they also sent a letter of compromise. So at that point, they said, we'll settle for 15 grand, I thought, or 10 grand or something. So I knew they were only prepared to pay $5,000 in legal fees. So I just said, we're going to outspend them. So there's a lot of tactics in the law. It's not about just having the right case. And little things like that, sending the letter, it's bad. You don't signal what you want at the beginning because then they know. I was able to outspend them. I don't think we paid them anything.
So, Bryce, all this time you've started as an article clerk at Rothwarren, become an employee solicitor, become a partner at Rothwarren. In building this practice in the entertainment world, or particularly the film world, did you also have a number of solicitors working for you within a team at Rothwarren?
Not in the early years. It was all just me, and but in those days it was only 3 or 4 of us at Rothwarren, and there was a few we'd get add to the teams. But no, it was mainly the employment. Film stuff was just me. Look, in those days it was more risky in a sense because you didn't know who was going to get funded and all that sort of stuff. So, but also I did other bits and pieces. I did litigation and bits and pieces when things were slow or whatever the case may be. So I kept my hand in other areas. And Michael, who was my partner, had a commercial practice, and that would occasionally swap over. I remember once on Spotswood we found this fantastic location. It wasn't until after the location that I ended up acting for both parties because I acted for the tenant as well. Because that was sort of commercial practice. But it was I've always enjoyed working with people rather than I could never have gone out on my own. Just the ability to go to your partner and say, look, I got into a tight situation. I don't know what to do. Should I do this or do that? And whatever the case may be. It's very helpful to have somebody at least a little bit older to give you that advice. I say Arnold was a great teacher, and that's true in terms of the early days, but Michael was equally as helpful to me. I mean, other lawyers are very helpful in doing this. And when we imploded at Rothwarren and I moved my practice to Marshalls, by then I had somebody working for me, and that's grown. And now I've got about 8 working for me, and we've got a big practice which helps to have the Americans coming in. Our dollar is good level and all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, we do a lot of that work. Having partners means I hate sending work out. So having partners means you can send the litigation to somebody else, you can send the employment to somebody else, and you can keep an eye out and you can be a full service firm. So the only thing we don't do is crim, and we do a lot of family. So, but I've always enjoyed acting for having partners to knock over ideas and stuff like that. It's very helpful.
And so this maybe 2002, 20 odd years ago, Rothwarren is dissolved and you've got to move your practice.
Yeah.
And did you go to Marshalls and Dent because they already had or did work in the film world?
As it turns out, I got the most sensible offer off from Bill. I had a couple of firms interested, but I think I made the right call because they had a practice. They knew how bumpy it was. I could have gone to one of the bigger firms, but, I'm not sure I'm cut out for the bigger firm stuff. And so, I just moved practice and kicked on. I mean, Bill, unfortunately, did the bad thing by me. He went and died. I mean, what was that about?
And that's Bill Marshall.
Yeah, Bill Marshall.
And he did some entertainment work himself.
Yeah, he had a big practice. But by the time I got there, it was about one client, so it had fallen in disrepair, if you like. Bill, also very clever and helpful, had a great deal of experience. And old-fashioned lawyer, handwrite contracts and stuff. Not sure he knew how to use a computer.
Can I go back to that Section 10BA? As you said, it had a big effect on the industry. A lot of films were made, because it was supply-driven. No, sorry, it was supply-driven, not demand-driven.
Correct.
So what's the system we've got now?
The current system is a combination of, for local films, where they can get funded directly, so the direct funding, but also for all films, there's an offset situation. So for Australian films, you can get 40% back, which is called the producer offset. Foreign films get 30% through location offset.
Sorry, 40% of what or 30% of what?
Qualifying, it's called, we call it QAPE, because everything in the film industry has got to have a pseudonym, or an acronym rather. It's qualifying Australian production expenditure. So everything we spend on a film gets a tax rebate. And then in order to make the film, we go to banks and we borrow it and blah, 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 and all that sort of stuff. We don't go to the major banks. We go to mostly foreign banks, because our banks won't lend in the film industry.
Too risky?
Well, they don't understand it. It's not too risky. I mean, gap funding is risky, but producer offset funding is not very risky.
What gap funding is funding the difference between the producer offset and the total price.
Which is called a gap. It's not highly intelligent, but gap funding is mainly you're selling against unsold territories. So if you've sold Australia, and the producer offset is demand-led in that you can't get the producer offset unless you've got a distribution deal. So you've got to have a distribution deal in Australia to get the offset. And that's fair enough. I mean, people are paying tax. You're getting some of the tax back. They need to be able to go to the cinema and say, funded by us.
Lives in the Law is proudly sponsored by City Maps Illustrated. Their recent publication, The Melbourne Map, is a celebration of our wonderful city. This stunning, hand-drawn illustration, which took more than 3 years to create, is available as an art print, jigsaw puzzle and calendar. The perfect acquisition for your home, office or corporate gifting.
It seems to me, and I'm just average Joe on the street, quite a few large American films come to Australia now and are made in Australia?
Yes, lots.
Why is that?
Because they get a tax rebate of 30% and the dollar's low. So the dollar works for them. So I'm working on a $100 million picture at the moment. Unfortunately, not all that's going to me, but they will. I think the stars are earning half of it, but it's good for the economy. So spending.
But it's good for them because the American dollar can buy $1.50 of our money or something like
Correct.
that.
So the Fall Guy is a good example. So the Fall Guy was made completely in Australia. Well, not completely. I think they post somewhere else. But films they decide to make films depending on the incentives and dollar and all that sort of stuff. And it's a hard business to be in. But yeah, usually the studios have one or two people. That's all they do. Look at subsidies and stuff.
It's interesting to hear what you're saying, Bryce, and how you work. And a lot of your work is, as you say, organising, bringing the parties together.
And certainly the financing work, which is what we do for Australian films. The work we do on foreign films or overseas films is more about clearances and making sure the contracts are right and, with all the vendors and all that sort of stuff. And, getting the appropriate agreement with the unions for the cast and the crew and all that sort of stuff.
Does it involve a lot of travel for you?
I didn't go this year, but I used to go to the Cannes Film Festival every year, which is a lot of fun.
And that was to meet and greet?
Meet and greet, basically, yeah. The festival's useful in that whole bunches of lawyers go from all over countries go and lots of clients go, and I wish it was just around the corner because it's so far to go, but it's a great opportunity to meet and greet. It's all about financing. The people that decide who gets the legal work are usually the people with the money, so you've got to find them. So that's what it's all about, and then you impress them, you get the work.
Obviously, from what you're telling us, Bryce, the film industry is not confined to one geographical area. It's not confined to Hollywood or Bollywood or Europe. It's everywhere.
Correct. To be perfectly honest, films are funded in much the same way all over the place. And in fact, a lot of the laws are similar. A couple of years ago, I did a film for Rose and Ben called Rosemary Blight and Ben Grant called, can't remember the name. We sold it to Warner's. And Warner's have a procedure of going through the clearances at the end. And I remember I got this letter from some turkey at Warner's that said, scene so-and-so, there's a painting in the background. Have you got it cleared? Ring up the art department. They bought it in an op shop. We don't know who the copyright owner is. So I wrote back to them and said, no, it's section 64, 54, something in the Copyright Act that says as long as it doesn't form principal purpose of the thing, it's not considered a breach of copyright. And the smartass said, but we bought UK and US and something else. And so I looked up the legislation in each of those countries and said, it's the same there. F off. There is, the jurisdictions is not dissimilar everywhere. And so since then, one of the jobs I have article clerks that come and do their couple of weeks is I say, you've got to find a country and then add the legislation that gives them the same rights that we have here in relation to using a film within a film. So
now there's a huge film industry in India, Bollywood.
Correct.
Does that impact upon you? Do we sell into India? Do India sell here to us, or you work with them?
I've done a couple of small Indian films, and they do come to Australia to shoot, but they're incredibly low budgets. There's usually not much budget for lawyers, so I'm not that interested. But yes, they're usually low budget. We have just signed a co-production treaty with India, so maybe there's some potential to do that. Because film has got tax credits everywhere and all that sort of stuff, and that's how you put the film together and all the national benefits, so to speak. Co-productions are a way of trying to beat Hollywood. So, we have a treaty with the UK, and that means if we can do a treaty film, the film gets both UK benefits and Australian benefits. So it can become an international film, so we can fight Hollywood. That's the theory. So Australia has co-production treaties with the UK, France, blah, 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 a whole lot. Not that many. Canada has tons of them. New Zealand has some. You put together co-productions, and that's quite helpful in terms of getting the tax benefits. It means that there's more work for lawyers, of course, so we love it. So we've just signed a treaty with India, so there's a possibility that there'll be some more films. But co-productions, Australian producers are not that good at putting together co-productions unless there's a shared culture. And that's the difficulty with co-productions is that you often the story has to go over two jurisdictions or else it's not. You
mentioned third-party contract law.
I've got a pretty laissez-faire attitude to where the law is based and all that sort of stuff. So I advise on contracts, doesn't matter where they say their law of and all that sort of stuff. The only real difference I've ever discovered is that in England they have a Third-Party Contracts Act, which means if you get a benefit from a contract between two other people, you have the ability to sue. I don't know how you find out, but yeah, here we don't have that. There is a limited third-party contract in New South Wales and some of the building law, but that's one of the areas that we don't, that the UK law is different from Australia, but there's not that much else.
So typically, to sue under a contract, you've got to be a party to the contract.
Privity of contract.
But this UK Act, says even if I'm not a party to the contract, we get a benefit from the contract, I've got a right to sue.
That's right. So most UK contracts you get exclude that, have a clause that excludes that act.
How's that relevant to the film world?
Well, we do a lot of contracts with the UK. So UK is still the centre of the independent film industry in the sense a lot of the sales agents are based there, a lot of the money's based there. So because the US is Hollywood, so it's not necessarily independent films. So independent films, independent of Hollywood, are centred in the UK. And it was a lot easier before Brexit.
Yeah.
It's harder now.
Yeah.
They're gonna struggle because now that you can do a co-production with France, it'd be almost easier. The French are difficult to deal with.
Now, we are talking about a life in the law, and a significant part of the law is litigation. Has litigation arisen out of any of your work? Have you had to get into a witness box and justify anything you've ever done, or your clients had to do that?
I haven't actually had any of my contracts be the subject of litigation, thank goodness. But you do get into situations where there is litigation or something goes wrong. I mean, a classic example is in Two Hands, which I worked on. Scrabble wouldn't give us clearance. Scrabble is divided into two halves, the UK and the US. So we got permission from one part of the Scrabble organisation, but couldn't get permission. They wrote back and said there's too much swearing in the film. Bloody hell, it hadn't been to my office. So what do you do? Brian Brown and his criminal cohorts were playing Scrabble. I took out all the trademarks of the set. I didn't want to get sued by Scrabble. But is it suable just to use Scrabble in a film? Yeah. The Americans take the view it is because misleading, deceptive. Most Scrabble gets so much credit now for being in films that people, when seeing credit, would say you've got permission. Therefore, if you don't get permission, it's misleading and deceptive. Tough argument, but that's what they run with. Anyway,
and they might outspend you.
That's right. But on Scrabble, what happened during the publicity? All the journalists got, because of a great scene in the film, they were giving out Scrabble pieces as part of the film. And somebody rang up and said, we haven't got permission. I said, don't worry. If we get sued, I love it. It's a great time to get sued. We're releasing the film. We didn't get sued, by the way.
Pleased to hear it, Bryce. One of the things that's crossed my mind in listening to you this morning, do you become so caught up in the film that you feel the same pressure as a director or a star or a producer, that you're waiting for the release of the film, you're waiting to read the reviews, what are the critics going to say, will it succeed, will it fail? Do you feel that sort of pressure as a lawyer?
Not exactly. If the films I work on are successful, then I get more work. If they're not successful, I get less work. To a degree, I can move on to the next film. It's not, I don't get stressed if a film that I worked on that I thought was good doesn't get the good reviews and stuff. That doesn't stress me. I do get stressed when you're in the middle of a film and the financing falls over and you've got to redo the financing and all this sort of stuff. That can be quite stressful. But I try and take most of the stuff in what I do can be solved by just me putting in more work. So, yeah, I try not to get stressed about anything. It's just money. Yeah, and usually as a filmmaker or even as a lawyer, you've got to look at films in different ways. You can look at films artistic success, commercial success. Also, don't put everything in on commercial. It's so risky. And if you can make a good film, it's halfway there. It may not be commercial, but it's halfway there.
Do you ever, as an actor, say, if you like an actor, look at a script or look at a deal and say, this isn't going to be successful, I don't want to be a part of it, and knock it back as a lawyer? No,
I don't read it. Well, I only read the scripts I get the scripts read by juniors for clearance purposes, yeah. But I don't read them now for funding. Because I don't really care what the lawyer thinks. I read Muriel's Wedding, I thought it was good, but one of the reasons I don't read the script is I don't like it. I won't work as hard, so I prefer to wait for the film to come out.
Yeah,
so
good point.
Much happier to wait for the film. And reading a script's an art. So many people read scripts, think, I don't think people know, because it's just an outline, execution dependent, as they say. Most films are.
Bryce, I assume many young lawyers would like to work in your area of practice. From the outside, it looks glamorous. It may not be from the inside, of course, but it looks glamorous from the outside.
Certainly looks glamorous. Yeah, it's not that glamorous, I've got to say. I mean, reading 50-page contracts is not glamorous in any world. Trying to make sense of them is even harder. What I tell people, because I get a lot of, got one yesterday, a lot of emails saying, I'd like to get help, can you do coffee and blah, 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 tell me. And I don't necessarily have jobs for them all, because I can't. Tricky thing is getting a leg in to entertainment law. Once you've got a leg in, you know the industry, it's a bit easier. But it's much wider than people think. I mean, Channel 9 has 5 lawyers. Channel 10 has 2 lawyers. All the entertainment companies have lawyers. And if you can get on the ground level, then you don't need to know much and you're there. Racing industry has a couple of lawyers. The betting industry has a couple. It's all entertainment. It's all the same stuff. Film Victoria has lawyers. ABC has 50 lawyers. It's much broader. And private practice is not, if I'd had my time again, I might have gone to the UK and worked for a company or something to get a bit quicker industry and stuff. But private practice is a very hard way of getting all the experience, because you've got to get paid at the same time, which is, some of the harder bits. But yeah, I like passing on my skills and all that sort of stuff, which is useful to clerks and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah. But I tell them, don't focus on private practice, because you won't get any. I mean, there's 5 or 6 doing what I do in this area. It's very limited what we do.
Bryce, it's been absolutely fascinating. I guess most of us are fascinated by the entertainment world, and particularly the film world. It impacts all of our lives. And to sit here this morning and hear you tell us about it from a legal perspective, it has been intriguing and interesting. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks a lot. It's been great talking about. I feel a bit humbled by all this stuff, but anyway, I've been doing it for so long. It's been a great life. Not finished yet.
Show notes from today's episode can be found at greenslist.com.au/podcast. There you'll find links to things we've talked about in this episode, a transcript of the show, and some wonderful photos of our guests. If you're enjoying Lives in the Law, please tell your networks, subscribe, rate and review the show. Your host is former lawyer and Greens List clerk Michael Green. Our show is produced and edited by me, Catherine Green, mixed and mastered by Windmill Audio, and recorded by Alex McFarlane, who also wrote and performed all the music for the series. We're coming to you from the iconic Owen Dixon Chambers on the corner of William and Lonsdale Streets in our beautiful city of Melbourne. We acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians of this land and pay our respect to their elders past and present. There is no doubt that conversations about justice have been taking place on this land for thousands of years, and we are privileged to continue that discussion here today.